The glass shattered against the marble wall, red wine bleeding down like tears of betrayal. Camilla stood frozen in Johnny's office, her chest heaving as the truth crashed over her like a tidal wave. Her brother Michael had died because he worked for the very man standing before her, the man she'd fallen in love with. The words hung in the air between them like a loaded weapon, and Johnny's silver eyes reflected a pain she'd never seen before, the pain of a man whose past had finally caught up to destroy the only pure thing in his dark world. Tell us your city below, then enjoy the story and subscribe for more. Now let's get to the story. But this moment of devastating revelation had been building for weeks, ever since that terrible afternoon when Johnny Castellano first found his assistant crying in the supply closet. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Camilla pressed her face against her knees, trying to muffle the sobs that threatened to tear her apart. The supply closet smelled of cleaning chemicals and old paper, but it was the only place in the entire Castellano Industries building where she could fall apart without anyone seeing. Her phone buzzer again, another hospital bill, another reminder that Michael was gone. And she couldn't even afford to bury him properly. The door opened without warning, flooding the small space with light from the executive hallway. Camilla's head snapped up, expecting to see Maria from housekeeping or maybe Janet from accounting. Instead, Johnny Castellano himself stood in the doorway, his 6'2" frame filling the space, his perfectly tailored charcoal suit somehow making the cramped closet feel even smaller. "Camilla?" His voice was softer than she'd ever heard it, the commanding tone he used in board meetings replaced by genuine concern. "What are you doing in here?" She scrambled to her feet, wiping her face with the back of her hand, knowing her mascara was probably streaked down her cheeks. In the 2 years she'd worked as his executive assistant, Johnny had never seen her anything less than composed and professional. "I'm sorry, Mr. Castellano, I needed a moment." She tried to step past him, but he didn't move from the doorway. "Has someone hurt you?" There was something dangerous in his tone now, the voice of a man accustomed to solving problems with swift and permanent solutions. His silver eyes scanned her face, taking inventory of every tear, every tremor. "No, sir, it's nothing work-related." "I should get back to my desk." "Camilla." He said her name like a command, and despite everything, she found herself meeting his gaze. "In 2 years, you've never taken a sick day. You've stayed late every night I've asked, come in early every morning, and handled my schedule like a military operation. You don't cry in supply closets over nothing." The kindness in his voice broke something inside her. Fresh tears spilled over as she looked up at this man who paid her well, treated her with respect, and somehow managed to run a multi-million-dollar empire while remaining mysteriously single and devastatingly attractive. "My brother died," she whispered, the words feeling foreign and impossible on her tongue. 3 days ago, the doctors, they said if he'd gotten treatment sooner." She couldn't finish the sentence. Johnny's expression shifted, something darker creeping across his features. "Which hospital?" "St. Mary's on 5th Street. But Mr. Castellano, really, I should take the rest of the week off." He pulled out his phone, already dialing. "Full pay. I'll handle your workload." "I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm telling." He stepped back to let her pass. "And Camilla, I'm sorry for your loss." As she walked to her desk to gather her things, Camilla heard him speaking quietly into his phone, though she couldn't make out the words. 20 minutes later, as she sat in her car in the parking garage, her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. "Miss Rivera, this is Dr. Patterson from St. Mary's Hospital. I'm calling about your brother's final arrangements. It appears all outstanding medical bills have been settled, and we've received authorization to release his body to Morrison Funeral Home. They're expecting your call." Camilla's hands trembled as she hung up. Morrison Funeral Home was the most expensive in the city, the kind of place that catered to wealthy families with grand mausoleums and marble angels. There was only one person who could have arranged this, only one person with the resources and connections to make Michael's final arrangements disappear from her shoulders like they'd never existed. But why would Johnny Castellano care about the family of his assistant, and how had he arranged everything so quickly? "First," the funeral was beautiful in a way that hurt. Michael lay in a mahogany casket that cost more than Camilla made in 6 months, surrounded by enough flowers to stock a greenhouse. The service at St. Patrick's Cathedral drew friends she hadn't seen in years, all of whom seemed surprised by the elaborate arrangements. "So your brother always said he'd make it big someday," said Tommy Rodriguez, Michael's best friend from high school. Guess he wasn't lying. Camilla nodded numbly, accepting condolences from people who kept glancing around at the expensive memorial displays with confusion. She'd tried to call Johnny 3 times to thank him and ask about repayment terms, but his calls went straight to voicemail. As the last mourners filed out of the cathedral, Camilla stood alone beside Michael's casket, running her fingers over the brass nameplate. "I don't understand what you were involved in," she whispered, "but I promise I'll figure out how to pay him back. Whatever it costs. There's no debt to repay." She spun around to find Johnny standing at the end of the pew, no longer in his usual business attire. Instead, he wore a black wool coat over dark jeans, his silver hair slightly mussed by the wind. Somehow, he looked more dangerous this way, less like a corporate executive and more like someone who could command respect through presence alone. "Mr. Castellano, I didn't know you were here. I wanted to pay my respects." He moved closer, his footsteps echoing in the empty cathedral. "Your brother was young. 23? 25? Camilla studied his face, searching for answers to questions she couldn't quite form. "You didn't have to do all this. The funeral, the hospital bill. It must have cost a fortune. Money isn't the issue. Then what is?" The words came out sharper than she intended. "Why would you spend thousands of dollars on a stranger's funeral? What aren't you telling me?" Johnny was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on Michael's casket. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight she'd never heard before. "Sometimes we're responsible for things we never intended. Sometimes we inherit debts that aren't ours to pay, but we pay them anyway. I don't understand." "Your brother." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "He'd been trying to get in touch with someone in my organization. My security team had flagged his calls, but they never made it to my desk. If they had what? He might still be alive." The words hit Camilla like a physical blow. She staggered back, her hand finding the edge of the pew for support. "What do you mean? What kind of calls?" "The kind that suggested he was in trouble. The kind that indicated he needed help." Johnny's jaw tightened. "The kind that people make when they're desperate enough to reach out to someone like me." "Someone like you?" Camilla's voice rose, echoing off the cathedral walls. "What does that mean? You're a businessman. You run import companies and real estate holdings. What could my brother possibly want with—" She stopped, the pieces suddenly clicking together in her mind. The expensive funeral arrangements made with a single phone call, the hospital bills settled within hours, the way Johnny could command immediate action with just his name. "You're not just a businessman," she said quietly. Johnny met her eyes, and in them she saw a confirmation that changed everything. "No, Camilla, I'm not." The cathedral fell silent, except for the sound of her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Outside, she could hear the distant traffic of the city, the normal world continuing while hers shifted on its axis. She thought about every late night she'd worked in his office, every phone call she'd screened, every meeting she'd scheduled without really understanding what was being discussed. "Then what are you?" Johnny's smile was sad and dangerous all at once. "I'm the kind of man your brother thought could save him. And I'm the kind of man who failed him before I even knew he existed." Camilla didn't sleep for 3 days after the funeral. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Johnny's face as he'd confessed to being more than he seemed, heard his words about inheriting debts and failing Michael before he knew he existed. She'd called in sick to work, unable to face sitting outside his office and pretending everything was normal. On Thursday morning, her doorbell rang at exactly 7 a.m. She opened it to find a woman in an expensive black coat, her silver hair pulled into a perfect chignon, despite the early hour. "Miss Rivera? I'm Elena Vasquez, Mr. Castellano's advisor. He'd like to speak with you." "I don't think that's a good idea." Elena's smile was polite but firm. "I'm afraid it wasn't a request. There are things you need to understand about your brother's situation, and Mr. Castellano believes you deserve the truth." 30 minutes later, Camilla found herself in the back of a sleek black car, winding through parts of the city she'd never seen before. They pulled up to a warehouse that looked abandoned from the outside, but Elena led her through a side entrance into what appeared to be a comfortable office space, complete with leather furniture and oil paintings. Johnny stood with his back to the door, staring out a window at the harbor beyond. He'd traded his usual suits for dark jeans and a black sweater, but somehow he seemed more imposing than ever. "Thank you for coming," he said without turning around. "Did I have a choice?" "There's always a choice." "Camilla, that's something I want you to understand before we go any further." He turned then, and she was struck by how tired he looked, The lines around his eyes seemed deeper, his silver hair slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. "Your brother was in debt," he said without preamble. "Gambling debt specifically. $50,000 to some very unpleasant people who don't negotiate payment plans." Camilla sank into one of the leather chairs, the number hitting her like a physical blow. 50,000. That's impossible. Michael worked at a garage. He barely made enough to cover rent, which is why he started gambling. Small bets at first, then bigger ones when he fell behind. The kind of spiral that happens faster than you'd think. Johnny moved to pour himself a drink from a crystal decanter, his movements controlled, but tense. When someone owes that kind of money to the wrong people, they start looking for alternatives. What kind of alternatives? Work. Off-the-books work that pays well enough to cover debts quickly. Understanding dawned slowly, like watching the sun rise through storm clouds. "You mean illegal work?" "I mean dangerous work." Johnny's voice was carefully neutral. "The kind where mistakes have permanent consequences." "And you think he was trying to contact you to—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "To ask for a job or protection or both." He set down his drink without taking a sip. "My organization occasionally helps people in difficult situations. Sometimes we employ them. Sometimes we simply make their problems disappear." "Your organization." Camilla tested the words, trying to make sense of everything. "What kind of organization requires euphemisms?" Johnny was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of confession. "The kind that operates outside conventional business practices. The kind that solves problems other people can't solve. The kind that your brother thought might save his life. But it didn't." "No, it didn't." The pain in his voice was raw and real. "By the time his messages reached my attention, the people he owed had already collected their debt. Not in money." Camilla closed her eyes, feeling tears burn behind her lids. When she opened them, Johnny was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know the truth about how he died, and because—" He hesitated, then continued. "Because I've been in this business for 20 years, and I've never regretted anything as much as I regret not answering those phone calls." The silence stretched between them. Heavy with implications neither of them was ready to voice. Finally, Camilla stood, her legs unsteady beneath her. "I need time to process this." "Of course. And I don't know if I can come back to work, knowing what I know now." Johnny nodded, but something flickered across his face. "I understand." "But Camilla," she paused at the door, "the people who killed your brother are still out there, and now that they know he had family—" The implication hung in the air like a threat, and Camilla's blood ran cold as she realized her nightmare might just be beginning. Camilla spent the weekend moving between her apartment and her local coffee shop, never staying in one place too long, constantly checking over her shoulder. Johnny's warning echoed in her mind. The people who killed your brother are still out there, and now that they know he had family— She'd tried to convince herself she was being paranoid, but the black sedan that appeared wherever she went suggested otherwise. Monday morning she walked into Castellano Industries with dark circles under her eyes, and a decision she hoped she wouldn't regret. Johnny's assistant looked surprised to see her. "Miss Rivera, Mr. Castellano didn't expect you today. Is he in?" "Yes, but he's in a meeting with—" Camilla pushed past her and opened Johnny's office door without knocking. Inside, Johnny sat across from two men in expensive suits who looked like they'd stepped out of a crime drama. All three men turned to stare at her. "Gentlemen," Johnny said calmly, "we'll continue this later." The visitors left without a word, but not before one of them looked Camilla up and down with an expression that made her skin crawl. When the door closed, Johnny moved to his desk and leaned against it, crossing his arms. "You came back. Someone's following me." She tried to keep the fear out of her voice. Black sedan, tinted windows. "They've been outside my apartment, my coffee shop, even followed me to the grocery store." Johnny's expression darkened. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. "Marcus? I need eyes on Camila Rivera, full protection detail, starting now." He hung up and looked at her. "Problem solved." "Just like that?" "Just like that." He moved to the window and peered through the blinds. "Though it confirms what I suspected. Victor Moretti's people have connected Michael to you." "Who is Victor Moretti?" "The man your brother owed money to. The man who ordered his death." Johnny's voice was flat, emotionless. "The man who apparently thinks you might be worth something." Camilla sank into the chair across from his desk, the weight of everything finally settling on her shoulders. "What does he want with me? Information? Revenge, leverage. Johnny returned to his desk, but instead of sitting, he perched on the edge closest to her chair. Michael died without paying his debt. In Moretti's world, that debt transfers to family. $50,000, plus interest, plus penalties for late payment, plus compensation for the inconvenience of having to track down new collection targets. Johnny's jaw tightened. It's probably closer to 100,000 now. The number made her dizzy. I don't have that kind of money. I know. I can't pay a debt I didn't create. I know that too. So what happens to me? Johnny was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her heart race. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. Nothing happens to you, because I won't let it. Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. Why do you care what happens to me? He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her face. His thumb traced the dark circle under her eye, and she felt something electric pass between them. Because somewhere in the last 2 years, you stopped being just my assistant, he said quietly. And because I couldn't save your brother, but I can save you. Camilla felt her breath catch as she looked into his silver eyes and saw something that had nothing to do with guilt or responsibility. Something that made her pulse quicken despite everything she'd learned about who he really was. Johnny, she whispered, not sure what she was asking. I know this is complicated, he said, his hand still cupping her face. I know you have every reason to run as far from me as possible, but if you stay, if you trust me, I promise you'll be safe. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it, and his expression went deadly calm. What is it? He showed her the screen. The message was simple. We have something that belongs to you. Come alone or we'll send her back in pieces. Below the text was a photo of a young woman with long dark hair, bound to a chair in what looked like a warehouse. Who is she? Camilla asked, though something about the woman's face seemed familiar. Johnny's voice was barely controlled rage when he answered, Your brother's girlfriend, the one no one told you about. The revelation hit Camilla like a slap. Michael had a girlfriend. Elena Vasquez, not my Elena. A different woman with the same name worked at the diner near Michael's garage. They'd been together for 8 months. Johnny was already moving, grabbing his coat and making phone calls. Moretti's people must have been watching her too. Why didn't I know about her? Camilla's voice broke. Why didn't he tell me? Because he was protecting you. Johnny paused in his preparations to look at her directly. The less you knew about his life, the safer you'd be if something happened to him. Unfortunately, it didn't work. Camilla stared at the photo on Johnny's phone, studying the fear in the young woman's eyes. Elena looked about her age, with the kind of tired prettiness that spoke of working double shifts and big dreams deferred. We have to help her. No. Johnny's voice was steel. I have to help her. You're going somewhere safe until this is over. She's there because of my brother, because of me. She's there because Victor Moretti is a monster who uses innocent people as leverage. He grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. This is not your fight, Camilla. It became my fight the moment Michael died owing money to that man. She pulled away from his grip, straightening her shoulders. I'm going with you. Absolutely not. You said I always have a choice. This is mine. Johnny stared at her for a long moment, and she could see the internal battle playing out across his features. Finally, he pulled out his phone and dialed. Marcus, change of plans. I need a full tactical team at Warehouse 17 in 30 minutes. No, she's coming with me, because if I leave her anywhere else, she'll find a way to follow me anyway. He hung up and turned back to Camilla. If you're doing this, you follow my lead. You stay behind me. You don't speak unless I tell you to, and if I tell you to run, you run. Understood? Understood. 20 minutes later, they pulled up to a warehouse district Camilla didn't recognize. Johnny's men, she tried not to think too hard about why he had men, were already positioned around the building. In the car, Johnny handed her a small device. GPS tracker. If something goes wrong, if we get separated, press the red button. My people will find you. What about Elena? Elena is my responsibility now. His voice was cold, businesslike, just like you are. They walked to the warehouse entrance, where 2 men in dark clothing flanked a single door. One of them nodded to Johnny with the kind of respect that spoke of long association and absolute loyalty. 6 men inside, boss. Moretti's here personally. Johnny nodded. Rules of engagement? Whatever it takes to get the girl out clean. As they entered the warehouse, Camilla's heart hammered against her ribs. The space was massive and mostly empty, their footsteps echoing off concrete floors. In the center of the room, under a pool of harsh light, Eleanor sat tied to a chair exactly as she'd appeared in the photo. Standing behind her was a man in his 50s with silver hair and a face that belonged in nightmares. Even from a distance, Camilla could see the cruel intelligence in his eyes, the way he smiled as Johnny approached. "Mr. Castellano," the man called out, "so good of you to come. And you brought a friend. Let the girl go, Moretti. Your problem is with me." "Oh, but that's where you're wrong." Moretti walked around Eleanor's chair, trailing his fingers across her shoulders in a way that made Camilla's stomach turn. "My problem was with Michael Rivera. Since he's no longer available to pay his debts, I've had to get creative about collection methods. Name your price. $150,000, plus interest, plus a personal apology for the inconvenience your interference has caused me." Johnny reached into his jacket, and Camilla heard the subtle sound of weapons being drawn by men positioned around the warehouse, but he only pulled out a checkbook. "Done." "Oh, Mr. Castellano, always so eager to throw money at problems." Moretti's smile widened. "But I'm afraid money won't solve this particular issue. What do you want?" "Your new assistant here." Moretti's eyes fixed on Camilla with predatory interest. "I think she'd make an excellent addition to my organization. Consider it a permanent payment plan." The temperature in the warehouse seemed to drop 10 degrees. When Johnny spoke, his voice carried a promise of violence that made Camilla's blood run cold. "That's not going to happen." "Then neither of them leaves here alive." Johnny took a step forward, his entire posture changing into something dangerous and fluid. "Victor, you've made a lot of mistakes in your life. But threatening her? That's going to be your last one." What happened next was chaos. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Johnny tackled Camilla to the ground, shielding her with his body as concrete chips rained down around them. Through the noise and smoke, she could see his men moving with military precision. And she realized this wasn't just a business negotiation, it was a war. When the shooting stopped, Moretti lay motionless near Eleanor's chair. Johnny's men were untying her, while others secured the warehouse, and Johnny was looking down at Camilla with an expression of such fierce protectiveness that it took her breath away. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak. "Good." He helped her to her feet, then cupped her face in his hands. "Because now you know exactly who I am, Camilla, and there's no going back." As Eleanor sobbed in relief, and Johnny's men cleaned up the evidence of what had just happened, Camilla realized he was right. She'd crossed a line tonight, stepped into his world completely, and despite everything, the violence, the danger, the knowledge of what he was capable of, she wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of how much she wanted to stay. The safe house was a penthouse apartment overlooking the harbor, with floor-to-ceiling windows and security that would make the president jealous. Elena Vasquez Michaels Elena sat wrapped in a blanket on the leather sofa, her dark hair falling in waves around her shoulders as she sipped tea with trembling hands. "I met Michael 6 months ago," she said quietly, her voice still hoarse from screaming during her captivity. "He came into the diner every morning for coffee and never ordered anything else. Always left a $20 tip on a $2 check." Camilla sat across from her, studying the woman her brother had loved enough to keep secret. "He never mentioned you." "He never mentioned you either." "Not by name." Elena's smile was sad and knowing. "But he talked about his sister all the time, how proud he was that you worked for some big executive, how you'd made something of yourself despite everything." "Despite what?" Elena glanced at Johnny, who stood by the windows with his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in rapid Italian. "Despite growing up the way you did, foster care, moving around, never having enough money, he said you were the strongest person he knew." The words hit Camilla like a physical blow. Michael had told Elena about their childhood, about the years of instability and fear that they'd never discussed between themselves. It felt like discovering a whole other version of her brother, one who'd been honest about their past, instead of pretending it didn't matter. "When did he start gambling?" she asked. Eleanor's face darkened. "About 2 months after we started dating seriously. He was so stressed about money, about not being able to take me anywhere nice or buy me things. I kept telling him I didn't care about that stuff, but he—" She trailed off, tears filling her eyes. "But he what?" "He said he wanted to be worthy of me. Said he was tired of being the kind of man who worked with his hands while his sister wore expensive clothes and worked in glass towers." Eleanor wiped her eyes with a tissue. "I think that's when he started betting on basketball games. Small amounts at first." Johnny finished his call and rejoined them, his expression grim. "Moretti's organization is finished. My people are handling the cleanup. But it's going to take some time to make sure all his associates understand the new arrangement." "What new arrangement?" Camilla asked. "The arrangement where anyone who threatens you or Elena disappears permanently." His voice was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the weather. "Consider it a comprehensive insurance policy." Elena looked between them with growing understanding. "You're not just Michael's sister's boss, are you?" "It's complicated," Camilla said. "He's Don Giovanni Castellano," Elena said quietly. "Michael figured it out about a month before he died. He showed me newspaper clippings, business articles that didn't quite add up. Said he thought you worked for someone really powerful." Camilla's blood went cold. "Michael knew who Johnny was." Johnny's jaw tightened. "That explains the phone calls." "What phone calls?" But even as she asked, Camilla was starting to piece together a picture that made her stomach turn. "Your brother called my office 17 times in his final 2 weeks, Johnny said carefully. "He never left detailed messages, just said he was family of an employee and needed to speak with me about a business opportunity." "Business opportunity," Camilla repeated the words, tasting their bitter implication. Elena nodded miserably. He'd read about how sometimes powerful men help people with problems. He thought if he could prove he was useful, maybe Mr. Castellano would help him pay off his debts. "Or give him work that paid enough to handle them quickly," Johnny added grimly. The room fell silent as the full weight of the situation settled around them. Michael had known exactly who Johnny was, had been trying to contact him, had been seeking the same kind of dangerous work that had ultimately gotten him killed. "He was trying to join your organization," Camilla said. "He was trying to save his life," Johnny corrected. "Unfortunately, he waited too long to make contact." Camilla stood abruptly, needing to move, needing to process what she was learning. She walked to the windows, staring out at the harbor where lights reflected off dark water like scattered stars. "You could have saved him," she said without turning around. "Yes." The simple admission hung in the air between them. No justification, no excuse, just the truth. "But you didn't know." "No. And now I'm here, in your world, under your protection." "Yes." She turned to face him, studying the man who'd become the center of her universe in ways she was only beginning to understand. "What happens now? Now you're safe. Elena's safe. And you both have choices to make about what comes next." "What kind of choices?" Johnny walked to where she stood, close enough that she could smell his cologne, could see the flecks of blue in his silver eyes. "The choice about whether you can live with who I am. The choice about whether what's growing between us is worth the complications it brings." Camilla's heart raced as she realized they were finally addressing the attraction that had been building between them for weeks. The way her pulse quickened when he looked at her, the way his touch lingered longer than necessary. The way they'd both been fighting feelings that made no sense in light of everything else. "And if I choose you, then you're mine to protect. Completely. No halfway measures, no casual arrangements." His voice was low, intense. "Once you're part of my world, Camilla, there's no going back to who you were before." Before she could respond, Elena cleared her throat softly. "I should probably mention that Michael left something for you. Something he made me promise to give you if anything happened to him." Elena pulled a small silver key from her purse, the kind that belonged to a safety deposit box. "He gave this to me 2 weeks before he died. Said if anything happened to him, I should find you and give it to you. Said there were things you needed to know about your family." Camilla took the key with trembling fingers. The metal was warm from Elena's palm, and she could see numbers etched into its surface. "What kind of things?" "He wouldn't tell me. Just said your parents didn't die in a car accident like you'd always been told." The words hit Camilla like a physical blow. She sank onto the edge of the sofa, the key clutched in her fist. "What did he say about our parents?" "That they died protecting something, and that someday you might need to know what that something was." Johnny moved to kneel in front of Camilla's chair, his hands covering hers. "We'll figure this out together. Whatever's in that safety deposit box, whatever Michael discovered about your family, you don't have to face it alone." She looked into his eyes and saw a promise that went deeper than attraction or even love. She saw commitment, the kind that meant he would stand between her and whatever darkness her past held. "The bank closes in 2 hours, she said quietly. "Then we'll go now." The drive to First National Bank passed in tense silence. Elena had chosen to stay at the safe house with 2 of Johnny's men, claiming she needed time to process everything. But Camilla suspected the young woman was giving her space to deal with whatever they were about to discover. The safety deposit box was small, containing only a manila envelope and a photograph. The picture showed two people Camilla barely remembered, a dark-haired woman with her eyes and a tall man with Michael's smile. But they weren't the people she remembered from the few childhood photos she'd seen. These people looked professional, serious. The woman wore an expensive suit and the man had the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. They stood in front of what looked like a government building, their expressions grave. "Do you recognize them?" Johnny asked gently. "They're my parents, but they look—" She struggled to find the words. "Different. Older than I remembered, more important." With shaking hands, she opened the envelope. Inside were official documents, newspaper clippings, and a letter in Michael's handwriting. The documents told a story that rewrote everything she'd believed about her childhood. Their parents hadn't been the struggling working-class couple she remembered. Maria Santos Rivera had been an assistant district attorney specializing in organized crime. David Rivera had been an FBI agent working undercover operations. They died not in a random car accident, but in a bombing that had been meant to stop Maria from testifying in a major racketeering case. "They were investigating the Torino family," Camilla read from one of the newspaper clippings. Mum was set to testify that their legitimate businesses were fronts for money laundering and extortion. Johnny's expression had gone very still. The Torinos were Victor Moretti's predecessors. They controlled most of the same territory before internal conflicts destroyed them. I mean your parents died trying to bring down the organization that eventually became Moretti's. They died fighting the same people who killed your brother. The irony was almost too much to bear. Her parents had died fighting organized crime, and she'd fallen in love with a man who embodied everything they'd tried to destroy. But as she looked at Johnny, she realized it wasn't that simple. Michael's letter confirmed what she was already beginning to understand. "Camilla, if you're reading this, then something's happened to me and Elena found you like I asked her to. I know this is a lot to process, but you needed to know the truth about Mom and Dad. I've been researching the people who killed them for 2 years. I know it seems crazy, but I wanted justice for them. I wanted to understand why we grew up alone when we should have had family, protection, a real life. What I found out is that the man you work for, Johnny Castellano, isn't like the people who killed our parents. His organization operates differently. They protect people instead of preying on them. They have codes, honor, rules. I was trying to contact him not just because I was in trouble, but because I thought maybe he could help us finally get justice for Mom and Dad. Maybe he could help us understand why they really died. I know this sounds insane, but I think the reason you ended up working for him wasn't coincidence. I think Mom and Dad would have wanted us to trust him. Be careful, but be brave. You're stronger than you know. Love always. Michael." Camilla read the letter twice, tears streaming down her face. When she finally looked up, Johnny was watching her with an expression of such tenderness that it took her breath away. "He was trying to protect you," Johnny said quietly. "Even at the end, even when he was desperate, he was thinking about your safety. He thought I could trust you. Can you?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications that went far beyond her brother's letter or her parents' death. This was about whether she could love a man whose world was built on violence, even if that violence was guided by principles her parents might have understood. "Yes," she said, and felt something inside her chest settle into place. "Yes, I can." Johnny's smile was soft and real, the first genuinely peaceful expression she'd seen on his face since this all began. He reached for her hand, bringing it to his lips to press a gentle kiss to her palm. "Then let's go home," he said, "and let's start figuring out how to build a life together." Home turned out to be Johnny's private residence, a restored Victorian mansion in the hills overlooking the city. As they pulled through iron gates that closed behind them with computerized precision, Camilla realized she was seeing yet another side of the man who'd become the center of her world. The house was elegant without being ostentatious, filled with antique furniture and original artwork that suggested generations of careful stewardship rather than new money trying to impress. Johnny led her through rooms that felt lived in and loved, stopping finally in a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a fireplace already crackling with warmth. "This is beautiful," Camilla said, running her fingers along the spine of a leather-bound first edition. "My grandmother's house," Johnny explained, pouring 2 glasses of wine from a bottle that probably cost more than her monthly salary. "She raised me here after my parents died." "How old were you?" 12. He handed her the wine, their fingers brushing in a way that sent electricity up her arm. "Old enough to understand what had happened, too young to do anything about it. What did happen? Johnny was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain. They were killed by the Torino family. A car bomb, just like your parents. My father had been trying to establish new rules for how business was conducted in the city. The Torinos saw it as a threat to their methods. Camilla's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. The same family that killed my parents. The same family. Johnny's smile was grim. My grandmother spent the next 10 years teaching me how to be different from them, how to build an organization that protected instead of preying, that followed codes of honor instead of simple greed. Is that why you do what you do? Revenge? It started that way, but revenge is just destruction. Camilla, what I built here is it's about protection, about making sure families like ours don't get torn apart by people like the Torinos. She set down her wine and moved to where he stood by the fireplace. This close, she could see the faint scar along his jawline, could count the silver threads in his dark hair. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe your brother was right. Maybe it wasn't coincidence that brought you into my life. Johnny turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to frame her face. Maybe our family's deaths were connected for a reason. What reason? So that we could find each other. So that we could build something together that honors what our parents died trying to protect. The words hung between them, heavy with possibility and promise. Camilla felt tears sting her eyes as she realized what he was offering her. Not just love, but purpose. Not just protection, but partnership. Johnny, she whispered, not sure how to put everything she was feeling into words. I know this isn't the life you planned, he said gently. I know it's dangerous and complicated and nothing like what you probably dreamed of when you were a girl. No, she agreed, it's not. But it could be good. Camilla, we could be good together. She looked into his eyes and saw everything she'd been afraid to hope for: love, security, belonging. A place where she could honor her parents' memory while building something new. A way to transform the grief and loss that had shaped her life into something meaningful. Yes, she said, rising on her toes to kiss him softly. Yes, we could. The kiss deepened, and Camilla felt herself melting into the warmth of his arms, the solid strength of his chest. This was different from the attraction that had been building between them for weeks. This was deeper, more certain. This was the feeling of coming home. When they finally broke apart, Johnny rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. There's something else you need to know, he said quietly. Camilla's heart clenched. What? About your brother? About how he really died? The warmth she'd been feeling evaporated, replaced by cold dread. What do you mean? You said Moretti's people killed him because of his gambling debt. That's true, but it's not the whole truth. Johnny took her hands, holding them gently but firmly, as if he could anchor her to him through whatever revelation was coming. Michael didn't just owe money. Camilla, in the weeks before he died, he'd been working for Moretti. Small jobs at first, delivering packages, collecting debts. He was trying to work off what he owed. The words hit her like a slap. That's impossible. I wish it were. But when my people investigated his death, they found evidence. Witness statements. Security footage of him making collections. Camilla pulled away from him, stumbling backward until her legs hit the edge of a chair. You're lying. I'm not. My brother wouldn't work for criminals. He wouldn't hurt people. He was desperate, Camilla, and desperate people do things they never thought they could do. She shook her head violently, refusing to accept what he was telling her. No, Michael was good. He was trying to protect me, trying to build a better life. He died trying to get out, Johnny continued gently. That's what my investigation revealed. He'd realized he was in too deep, and he was trying to find a way to break free from Moretti's organization. That's why he was calling me, not just for protection, but for a way out. The room spun around her as the full weight of the revelation crashed over her. Her brother, her good, loving, protective brother, had been working for the same organization that had ultimately killed him, had been collecting debts, threatening people, possibly hurting them. That's why Moretti killed him, she whispered. Yes, Michael was planning to come to me with information about Moretti's operations. He was going to trade intelligence for protection and a clean start for both of you. But he never made it. No, he never made it. Camilla looked at Johnny through tears that made everything blur and shift. Did you know? When you hired me, when you were being kind to me, did you know what Michael was? No, Johnny said firmly. I didn't know any of this until after his funeral, when my people finished their investigation. If I had known, you would have helped him? I would have saved him. The simple certainty in his voice broke something open inside her chest. She believed him. Despite everything, despite the complexity and moral ambiguity of the world they were navigating, she believed that Johnny would have saved Michael if he'd had the chance. "So, what does that make me?" she asked quietly. "The sister of a criminal who fell in love with another criminal." Johnny crossed the room to her, pulling her into his arms despite her resistance. "It makes you human," he said against her hair. "It makes you someone who understands that people aren't simply good or evil, that sometimes we do wrong things for right reasons, and sometimes we find love in places we never expected to look." Camilla cried against his chest, grieving not just for Michael's death, but for the simple version of him she'd carried in her heart. When her tears finally slowed, she pulled back to look at Johnny's face. "Is there anything else I don't know?" Johnny hesitated, and she felt her heart clench with dread. "What is it?" "There's one more thing, about how Michael's debt originated." "The gambling debt that got Michael killed," Johnny said carefully. "It wasn't entirely his fault." Camilla felt the ground shift beneath her feet again. "What do you mean?" "The games were rigged. The basketball bets, the poker matches, Moretti's people were manipulating the outcomes to create addicted gamblers, for then leveraging their desperation to recruit new workers." "You're saying Michael was set up?" "I'm saying he was targeted." Johnny's jaw tightened. "Moretti's organization had been watching you for months, Camilla. They knew you worked for me, knew you had access to my schedule, my meetings, my business. They wanted someone on the inside of my organization." The words hit her like ice water. "They used Michael to get to me. They created his gambling problem to force him into debt, then offered him work to pay it off. When that didn't give them the access they wanted, they escalated." "How?" Johnny's expression was grim. "They told Michael that if he could get you to quit your job with me and come work for one of their front companies, they'd forgive his debt entirely." Camilla staggered backward, her hand finding the mantelpiece for support. "That's why he was calling you. Not for work, not for protection. He was calling to warn me, to tell me that someone was trying to use you against me." Johnny's voice was thick with regret. "He died trying to protect you, Camilla. He chose to betray Moretti rather than put you in danger." The revelation recontextualized everything: Michael's secretiveness about his relationship with Elena, his distance from Camilla in his final weeks, even his death. He hadn't been a victim of his own poor choices. He'd been a target, manipulated and used because of his connection to her. "They killed him because he wouldn't give them what they wanted," she said. "They killed him because he chose you over his own survival. Because when it came down to it, your safety mattered more to him than his own life." Camilla closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her brother's sacrifice settle into her bones. Michael had died protecting her, without her ever knowing she was in danger. Had chosen to face Moretti's wrath rather than compromise her safety. "How long have you known this?" "I suspected it after the warehouse, confirmed it yesterday." Johnny moved toward her cautiously, as if she were a wounded animal that might bolt. "I wanted to tell you when we got home, but then we found your parents' documents and everything became more complicated." "More complicated," she repeated numbly. "Camilla, look at me." She opened her eyes to find him standing directly in front of her, his expression intense and pained. "Your brother died a hero. He might have made mistakes, might have gotten involved with the wrong people, but in the end, he chose to protect you over everything else. That's who he really was." The words broke through the numbness, and suddenly Camilla was sobbing again, not just for Michael's death, but for the impossible burden he'd carried alone in his final weeks, for the choice he'd made to sacrifice himself rather than put her in danger, for the brother she'd never fully known, but who had loved her enough to die for her. Johnny held her while she cried, his hands stroking her hair, his voice murmuring soft words of comfort in Italian. When her tears finally subsided, she pulled back to look at his face. "What happens now?" "Now we honor his sacrifice by building the life he wanted you to have. Safe, protected, loved, with you, if you'll have me." Camilla studied this man who had become everything to her: protector, partner, the keeper of truths she'd never expected to learn. Johnny Castellano was dangerous, powerful, connected to a world of violence and moral complexity that most people never had to navigate. But he was also the man who had held her while she grieved, who had risked his own safety to save Elena, who had made her brother's final sacrifice meaningful. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too. Even knowing what you know about my family, about the FBI and the district attorney's office." Johnny's smile was soft and real, especially knowing that. Your parents were heroes, Camilla. They fought for justice even when it cost them everything. That's the woman I fell in love with, someone who inherited their courage and their moral strength. And Michael. Michael was a good man who made bad choices under impossible circumstances. But in the end, he chose love over fear, just like you're doing now. Camilla felt something settle into place inside her chest, a sense of peace she hadn't experienced since childhood. She was still grieving, still processing everything she'd learned about her family and Johnny's world, but for the first time since Michael's death, she felt like she belonged somewhere. So what's next? Johnny's expression grew serious. Next, we deal with the fact that there are still people out there who might see you as a target. Moretti's organization is finished, but there are others who might try to use our relationship against us. Others? Rival families, federal investigators, people who think they can get to me through you. Camilla nodded, understanding that loving Johnny meant accepting a life where danger would always be a possibility. And you think I can handle that? I think you're Maria Santos Rivera's daughter. I think you're Michael Rivera's sister. I think you're stronger than you know and braver than you believe. He cupped her face in his hands. And I think together we can handle anything. As he kissed her, Camilla realized that this was what home felt like, not a place, but a person. Not safety from the world, but someone willing to face it with you. And for the first time since she was a child, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. But as they stood together in the firelight, neither of them saw the shadow that passed by the window, or noticed the car that had been parked across the street for the past hour, its occupants watching the house with the kind of patience that suggested they were willing to wait as long as necessary. The past had more secrets to reveal, and their love story was about to face its greatest test. The wine glass shattered against the marble wall, red liquid bleeding down like tears of betrayal. Camilla stood frozen in Johnny's office, her chest heaving as the truth crashed over her like a tidal wave. Her brother Michael had died because he worked for the very man standing before her, the man she'd fallen in love with. They were back where the story had begun, but now Camilla understood the full weight of what had led them here. "You knew," she whispered, her voice breaking. "All along, you knew Michael worked for you." "Yes," Johnny said quietly, making no attempt to deny it. "I found out 3 days ago." 3 days? She laughed bitterly, the sound sharp and painful in the silence of his office. "You've known for 3 days that my brother was one of your people, and you said nothing. I was trying to find the right way to tell you." "The right way?" Camilla's voice rose, echoing off the walls. "The right way would have been immediately. The right way would have been before I fell in love with you, before I trusted you with everything." Johnny moved toward her, but she backed away, holding up her hands to stop him. Don't come near me right now." "Camilla, please listen." "Listen to what? More lies? More half-truths?" Tears streamed down her face. "My brother didn't just work for Moretti. He worked for you first, didn't he?" Johnny's silence was answer enough. "How long?" 6 months, he said quietly. "He started doing small jobs for us about 6 months before he died." The timeline hit her like a physical blow. 6 months ago was when Michael had started acting differently, when he'd become secretive and distant, when he'd told Elena he wanted to be worthy of her, wanted to make enough money to build a real life. What kind of jobs? Protection details, document delivery, nothing violent, nothing that would put him in direct danger. But it was still illegal. Yes, and you knew who he was. You knew he was my brother. Johnny's jaw tightened. Not at first. He was hired under a different name, used fake identification. I didn't make the connection until what? Until after his funeral, when I started investigating his death and found the employment records. Camilla felt like she was drowning, gasping for air in a room that suddenly felt too small. Everything she'd believed about her relationship with Johnny, about the coincidences that had brought them together, crumbled around her. "So when you found me crying in that closet, when you paid for his funeral, when you comforted me—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "I cared about you before I knew the truth," Johnny said desperately. "My feelings for you had nothing to do with Michael. But you kept the truth from me. Even after we got together, even after I told you I loved you, you knew my brother had worked for you, and you said nothing. Because I knew it would hurt you. Because I knew you'd blame yourself." "Blame myself?" Camilla's voice was sharp with disbelief. "Why would I blame myself?" Johnny ran his hands through his hair, looking older than she'd ever seen him. Because Michael asked for the work specifically to pay for your education. The money he made working for me went into a savings account earmarked for your graduate school applications. The words hit her like a slap. What? He wanted you to be able to quit your job with me and go back to school. He was working dangerous jobs so you could have the life you'd always dreamed of. Camilla sank into a chair, the weight of revelation after revelation, finally too much to bear. Graduate school, Columbia University. Master's program in social work. He'd been saving for 2 years to pay your tuition. She closed her eyes, remembering conversations she'd had with Michael about maybe going back to school someday, about her dream of working with kids in foster care like they'd been, dreams she'd dismissed as impossible because of the cost. He never told me. He wanted to surprise you. He was planning to give you the money for your birthday next month. The cruelty of it was almost unbearable. Michael had been working for Johnny's organization not for himself, but for her, had been taking risks, putting himself in danger, also she could have opportunities he thought she deserved. And then he got involved with Moretti. Then Moretti's people found out he worked for me and saw an opportunity. They forced him into debt, then demanded he choose between his loyalty to my organization and his sister's safety. And he chose me. He chose you. Camilla opened her eyes to find Johnny watching her with an expression of such pain that it took her breath away. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I knew it would destroy you. Because I knew you'd blame yourself for his death, and you've already carried too much guilt for things that weren't your fault. That wasn't your decision to make. You're right. It wasn't. Johnny knelt in front of her chair, his hands reaching for hers. I was trying to protect you, but I was wrong. You deserved to know the truth about your brother, all of it, from the beginning. Camilla looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers. Despite everything, despite the betrayal and the hurt and the overwhelming complexity of what she'd learned, she still felt that electric connection between them. Do you really love me? She asked quietly. More than anything, even though loving me got my brother killed. Michael's death wasn't your fault, Camilla. It was mine. Johnny's voice was thick with self-recrimination. I should have protected him better. I should have seen the signs that he was in trouble with another organization. I should have... Stop! Camilla pulled her hands free and cupped his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. Michael made his own choices. He chose to work for you. He chose to keep secrets from me. He chose to sacrifice himself rather than put me in danger. None of that is your fault. But if I'd been honest with you from the beginning, if you'd been honest with me from the beginning, I might have run. I might have been so scared and overwhelmed that I would have missed the chance to know who you really are. She wiped tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand. I'm not saying I'm not hurt. I'm not saying I don't wish you'd trusted me with the truth sooner. But I understand why you didn't. Johnny's expression was hopeful, but cautious. So where does that leave us? Camilla was quiet for a long moment, thinking about everything that had brought them to this point. Her parents' death fighting organized crime, Michael's death trying to protect her, the complicated moral landscape of Johnny's world, where good and evil weren't clearly defined lines, but overlapping shades of grey. It leaves us with a choice, she said finally. We can let the pain and the guilt and the complexity of our situation destroy what we've built together. Or we can use it to build something stronger. What do you want? I want to honor my brother's sacrifice by living the life he wanted me to have. I want to honor my parents' memory by fighting for justice in whatever way I can. And I want to do both of those things with you. Johnny's smile was soft and real and full of relief. Are you sure? I'm sure that I love you. I'm sure that what we have is worth fighting for. And I'm sure that Michael would want me to be happy, even if that happiness comes from an unexpected place. As Johnny pulled her into his arms, Camilla felt the pieces of her world settle into a new configuration. It wasn't the life she'd planned or the love story she'd imagined, but it was theirs, built on truth and loss, and the kind of love that could survive even the darkest revelations. So what's next? She asked against his chest. Next, we get married. We build a life together that honors everyone we've lost. We use the resources of my organization to help people like your parents were trying to help, and we love each other through whatever comes. Is that a proposal? Johnny pulled back to look at her, his silver eyes bright with love and certainty. Camilla Rivera, will you marry me and help me build something beautiful from all this mess? Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, I will. As they kissed in the office where their love story had begun with tears and ended with promises, Neither of them noticed the framed photograph on Johnny's desk, a picture of him with a group of his men, taken 6 months earlier. In the background, barely visible but unmistakably present, was Michael Rivera, smiling as he stood shoulder to shoulder with the people who had become his second family. Michael had found his place in Johnny's world after all, and now, finally, so had Camilla. 6 months later, they were married in the garden of Johnny's grandmother's house, with Elena as maid of honor, and a carefully selected group of family and friends in attendance. Camilla wore her mother's pearl necklace and carried lilies like the ones Johnny had sent to her grandmother's funeral. As they danced to their first song as husband and wife, Camilla felt Michael's presence like a blessing. Her brother had wanted her to be safe, loved and free to pursue her dreams. Through Johnny, she had all three, and in the distance, barely audible over the music and laughter, church bells rang out across the city like a promise that some love stories, no matter how complicated their beginnings, were always meant to have happy endings.